Good morning, Branch Church, and welcome to our online services. Some of you this morning are watching us from our New Philadelphia and Baltic locations. Others of you have decided to host a watch party where you have invited friends or family into your homes to watch and worship together. And some of you I know are sitting there in your pajamas right now, drinking some really good coffee, and that's great. All of those options are great options. We will continue to do this plan again next week. This evening, a pastors forum will be launched on our YouTube channel. In that forum will be the pastors discussing our plan for worship moving forward into the coming weeks. They will also answer some additional questions that you have sent in over the last couple weeks. Today, this morning, we are continuing in our series in Psalms, and we will discuss Psalms 15 and 16.
Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at Psalm 15 and 16. And as we think about Psalms, you could summarize them by saying they're about prayer, praise, and promises. And so I want to ask about prayer, praise, and promises and how those help us develop intimacy with God. So Don, talk to us about prayer.
Well, I know for me personally, prayer for me is understanding that this God who created all things did that, I don't know, just bigger than life, God, that I'm important and that I matter. And not because I in myself have worth, but because he has given it to me. He has invited me to come into, the Bible literally said, approach his throne boldly. And that's a special place when I sit on my porch swing and I'm just pouring up my heart, knowing that the God of all of creation hears and he cares and he listens. And he isn't going to respond to just what I want. He's always going to respond in a way that's best for me and for others. So I just love that I have the right and the ability to have this close relationship with the God who created all things. So
It's the beauty of communication in this crazy relationship that we have with the God of all creation. It's
Amen.
like, why wouldn't we communicate? Like, why
Amen.
wouldn't we get to know him more?
Amen. Yeah.
That's awesome. What about praise, Jeff?
I think praise and music just have a special way of connecting with our hearts.
Mm.
I have XM radio in the van, and there's a station called Pop Rocks, and it's just basically my childhood. It's just my childhood in music, that just my teen years, and I make sure that I explain all of these songs to my sons and my little brother, so they for sure get it all. They don't care, but those songs, I listen to any one of those songs, and it almost always takes me to a specific place and time, and connects with an emotion from 20 years ago. Yeah. And I think music has a way of doing that. And I think God made it that way for us to have a way to connect with him. And I think worship music is just a powerful way to connect our hearts to the Lord. I think it's one of the reasons that we're so passionate about the kind of music in the church and people care deeply about it. Amen. Is because it connects to our hearts. And when you connect with your heart, it's just a different thing. And there's a lot of good ways to connect with God, but I think music and praise has a very specific purpose. Yeah,
and I think all of those music, prayer, praise, that they have this intimacy, this depth to them that draws us and connects us in our relationship with God. And what I love about promises is they kind of transcend both. They kind of filter their way into praise and worship. They filter their way into prayer. And as we study and as we read scripture, it's these promises of God that build an assurance with us, that let us know and help us to believe that God really loves us, that we have an assurance in that relationship with him that draws us ever close to him. When we're sure of something, when we're sure of his love, we go closer to him. When we're unsure, we step away from it. And so there's a drawing near to God through all of these things that we really see in the book of Psalms, and want to continue to encourage us as a church to draw near to God. And so we're going to look at Psalm 15. It says this: O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. And so Psalm 15 poses this question: who? Who And it causes us to think about this. Who is this person that is approaching God? And so when you think of approaching God, what image or what thoughts come to your mind?
I just think of all the stories I heard growing up in the church from the Old Testament, and like just the humility that people came before the Lord. You think of like the mountaintop and the burning bush, and there's honestly a fear. There's a little bit of a fear and trembling of like, God is so awesome. God is so other. God is just not even comprehensible by us. And I think there's this sense of awe and wonder that automatically comes when there's something that incredible that you come before.
Yeah. What about you, Don? When you think about approaching God, what thoughts come to mind?
So I always think more of he's my father, and I'm like a child, and that he invites me in. And I think part of that is just because when you don't really have a good father, you're always looking for someone. And God became that very young in my life. And so I always think that he's safe to approach. And I read the verses and I get what Jeff's saying about he's so big, but I think, man, I always see it like I can go talk to my father about everything that I can talk to no one else about. Yeah. And so I really kind of sense that when I approach God, that I'm his child and that I can approach him, and whether it be like if I'm struggling or I'm doing really well, like there's a little difference when I'm struggling, you know, like it's more like, man, I messed up again. I hate it. And sometimes I even hate it.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing well, it's almost like when I'm playing a sport and he was there and I hit the home run and he's like, and I'm really excited to go talk about to him. But sometimes it's more like I'm struggling. I don't want to go, but I still go. So.
That's awesome. I think when I think about approaching God, there's this idea of remembering grace and embracing holiness, like this idea that I don't have to clean myself up to approach God. But at the same time, God is holy, and I need to embrace that holiness. So as I come to him, I remember in my failings or as dirty as I feel, like I can always go to God and he will receive me with his grace. But at the same time, he's calling me to embrace a holiness and recognize that he's pure. Yeah. He is God of all of creation. And in that, my question then is why does God care so deeply then about our character? You know, he's calling us to something in this psalm. And so why does he care about our character?
Well, I think we represent him. And I mean, what's greater than when you represent, the Bible said we're ambassadors, right? And when we represent and when we live out godly character, it shows people what God is like he's full of grace and mercy and kindness and love and peace. And he is just and he's holy. And when those things are balanced, they're a beautiful thing. And God cares about that. And he cares that we are good representatives, ambassadors of who he is to a people that desperately need a God. So.
I think he wants what's best for us too.
Yeah,
and I think for us, the best thing is to be godly. Godly character is good for us in our lives day in and day out. And I think because he loves us and he wants what's best for us, he wants us to represent him. But he also just wants joy in our lives and peace in our lives. And those things come when we walk in holiness and godliness.
And as I read this and I read these different character qualities in this verse, they really connect to our heart. You know, and it's really a matter of our heart. And the beauty of that is when we develop this heart, it actually promotes the well-being of other people.
Amen.
And it's like last week I talked about Psalm chapter 1, where the tree that was planted by water produces fruit, and the fruit is not for the tree, the fruit is for others. And when we start producing this fruit, it benefits others around us. And so my last question for us today would be, what value is in self-reflection? Why does God does he call us to times of self-reflection? What does that look like?
I think self-reflection is so important, especially in our day in and day out lives. Life is crazy. I'm one of those guys who's more likely to just try to see what can I do for the Lord today, as opposed to spending time just thinking about him or meditating. And a lot of times that's great, but there's also a really important thing in the midst of a crazy life to stop and actually just say, God, what do you want to say to me? What do you want to do in my heart, in my life? Not what do you want me to do for somebody else or do for you, but what do you actually want me to do for me, for my growth, for you to work in my life? And self-reflection gives us a minute to do that in the midst of a crazy life where it's really hard to just stop, sit down, and let God speak to us.
And Don, when you think about self-reflection, have you ever had times when self-reflection turned into like beat Don up time? And if so, like, how do you fight against that? Because I don't know if God's just calling us to just beat ourselves up, but he's calling us to something from that.
You know, I love that we have the ability to stop and say, okay, who am I? And what's my heart and how am I living life? And I actually think as a person, as a human, those are very important times. And so you have to stop and take time to do that. You know, the Bible tells us all kinds of things about who we are or who we are called to be. And I think a lot of times we have to reflect and say, hey, am I listening? Am I obedient to what God has called me to? But it's such a human danger to make that a time of, I'm horrible, there's nothing good about me. Because then you forget that God has made you a new creation. So there's this crazy balance of, I'm new and I'm blameless in position with Jesus Christ, but I have a moral obligation to try to live that out and actually be in practicality what God has already made me in reality. And I think self-reflection are times when I can kind of do that.
And for me, self-reflection is often a time to stop the beating down of myself. Because in the midst of going, I can constantly be like, you should have done that better. You should have done that better. You should have been better at that. You should have prepared more for that. You should have been, I can just self-talk myself that way throughout weeks. And sometimes self-reflection, when you sit down in the Word and you say, what does God say about me?
Amen.
Is one of the only ways to stop that voice of like self-criticism.
Well,
so for me, it's really important.
And on the flip side, maybe it's, man, Travis, you're awesome at this. You're awesome at this. You're awesome at this. You're awesome at this. And I need to like sit down and do a self-reflection and say, hey, maybe you're not so awesome at all those things you think you're so awesome at doing.
Either way, it's really good for you.
It's good for you.
Yeah. So we want to encourage you that God calls us to godly character, and the way to get there is through his grace and his empowerment.
Amen.
And so we would just practically encourage you to use prayer, praise, and promises as a way to practically throughout your day consider how God may be calling you to more and more godly character and what that should look like for you.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
We're going to continue on in Psalm 16. It says this: Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out, or take their names on my lips. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. I love this psalm because it's about David taking his refuge in the Lord. And in life, as we navigate through it, it's easy for us to be tempted to find our refuge in places other than the Lord. So my question is where are you tempted to find your refuge?
For me, it's me. I have a Holmes County heritage, and if you do as well, you might understand, we're taught to be self-reliant.
Yep.
Like any problem you have, you can solve it yourself, work harder, try harder. And honestly, I don't see that as a terrible thing a lot of times. It's a good thing to try to solve problems yourself. But for me, it's really easy then to just always go there and not go to the Lord and just go, how am I going to fix this? How can I work harder? What can I do to solve this problem or this situation in my life? And it just sometimes gets in the way of me. The first response should be, Lord, what do you want to say to me? How do you want me to handle this? And seeking the Lord's wisdom and seeing him as my refuge and not having to just fix it myself every time.
And you would be a little opposite of that, wouldn't you?
Oh, just a little bit. Quintessentially, I'm kind of a people pleaser, and I find a lot of time my first thing I do is run to others and seek out others. And I'm with Jeff. That's not in and of itself a bad thing.
Right.
But sometimes I do it because I don't take time to stop and say, Lord, no, speak now, Lord. What do you want me to know and hear and to do? And then go and say, hey, here's kind of what God has said to me. What do you guys think? I always just run to others. And I think part of that is my being a people pleaser and also having this incredible fear of being alone.
Yeah.
And so I find for me it's others.
Yeah. And when you think about God as our refuge, why is it so important that he becomes our refuge? And how do we get there?
Well, I think the reality is he's the only thing that actually will come through every time. I'm kind of with Don. I often start by trying to fix it myself, and then I try to get other people to fix things. And then I'm finally like, well, I guess I need the Lord this time. And I think those moments teach you that it's only the Lord that really actually comes through every single time. Nothing wrong with asking other people for help, nothing wrong with trying to fix things yourself, but that's going to fail more often than not. And the Lord is the actual refuge who will help you in your time of need.
Yeah, and I find that refuge, that space that you create for the Lord, there's no other space like it for me. That's why, again, my porch swing has become such a vitally important time during this time of being isolated. And God has just been teaching me so much, even about myself, things I tend to do, fears I tend to have, and I run to others. And he just said, honestly, there's only one refuge. The only one who can actually solve those deep desires in my heart and answer the deep fears in my heart is the one that will never leave me nor forsake me.
Right.
And people are important in that process, but they aren't the answer to it. And that's why I think finding refuge in God is the only place that could be a sure foundation.
Yeah, as I was reading Psalm 16, one of the verses that just jumped off the page was verse 4, where it says, the sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. And as I was processing that, it's like when I find refuge or put my trust in someone or something other than God, and I reflect about it, I'm like, my sorrows did multiply. Have you guys experienced that, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. When I am constantly trying to find hope and peace and joy in other things and find that refuge that I think we all want, it almost always goes poorly in the end. Sometimes you do all right for a little while, but at the end of the day, it always ends up in sorrow.
What's like that progression you talked about? I'm going to try to do it. If that doesn't work, I'm going to find other people to try to do it. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go to God.
Yeah.
Instead of in our minds flipping that around.
Yeah, and oftentimes what I find during that time when I go to other people and they don't come through, I'm like blaming them and everything. And I put them in an impossible situation.
Yeah.
God's the only one who could do what I want him to do, and I'm somehow putting that pressure on other people, and it's not fair.
Yeah.
And so those are things I've found to be true also.
Yeah, I remember, not in a bad way, but I remember my first year of marriage. At one point, I just felt all this pressure. And I had to sit down with my wife and say, hey, I know you're not meaning to do this, but I feel like I have the pressure of Jesus in my life, because there's so much reliance and dependence upon me, and there's that weird balance. Like, as a husband, I should be reliant and dependent. Like, she should be able to come to there, but like at some point she's got to find her hope and reliance in Christ as well. And I don't think she was meaning to do that. I just felt that. And so we have to be aware of those things that happen. One of the things, how do we get there? I was thinking about that. One of the things I noticed about David in this song is he's very declarative. He says, "You are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel. I have set the Lord always before me." So there's these declarations about, I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm going to make him my refuge. Why is that so important for us?
We talk about this with a lot of the songs that we sing. Sometimes we'll say things in our songs that are like, we want to be true of us. We want them to be true in our lives, but they're not necessarily always true. I think that's exactly what David is doing here. He wasn't always feeling this way, but he's saying, I'm going to believe this to be true. I'm going to speak this out in my life. Amen. And I think there's power in saying things out loud and declaring them and saying, this is what I want to be true for me, for my family. And I think there's a real trap there if we say, well, I don't know if I want to say that because I'm not sure it's true. Speak it out, believe it, and see what God does as you do those things.
And I even think like declarations are such a part of the Bible, and they're not part of our culture. And we don't declare things. And like I tell people all the time, write a mission statement, declare these things, because even though you don't always feel them, you can ask God to make them true in your lives, but you have to start declaring them to be true. And so I think it's something that we've lost, and it would be awesome for us to get back to declaring some of those things that God wants for us.
The last verse 11 of Psalm 16 says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." And as we seek refuge in God, as we turn to him and put our trust in him, the beauty of that is the presence of God. Mm-hmm. And so what is so appealing and powerful about God's presence?
So I go back to my porch swing, and it's been the greatest lesson God has taught me through COVID. And I've even told him the other day, when winter comes, I'm going to get a space heater. I'm going to put it on the porch, and we're going to have porch time. But one of the things I'm finding is that when I run to other people, and I'm really just trying to not be alone and trying to work through problems. But I found that the one who says he will never leave me nor forsake me, the one who knows all things, I can trust him. And honestly, the presence of God, and I love my friends. I do. I love them, probably sometimes too much. But I'm finding that as my love for God has grown, it hasn't diminished that. It's just his love has been elevated to, there's a special place I don't want anyone else to have but Jesus. And that porch time is it for me.
And there's so many times in my life where I'll be wrestling through something and trying to find solutions, and I'll spend an entire week just thinking about something and how am I going to solve this? And you guys know, I can get in the zone, and sometimes it's helpful, but a lot of times I'm just like spinning. I'm just digging the hole deeper, trying to figure it out. And then I get in the presence of God. I sing a song, I spend time in the Word, I get together with people and we're praying, and all of a sudden everything changes.
Yeah.
You just have that feeling of everything has changed, and all of these things you were so worried about, you maybe have a solution, maybe you're not so worried about them anymore. And I think the presence of God does something that nothing else can do. No conversation with someone else can bring you that peace. It's only in the presence of the Lord. And I think that's what it's referencing.
And don't you think that verse that said, in the peace of God that passes all
Yes.
understanding?
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
And the beauty of God's presence is that joy and that peace and that sometimes clarity in life that we so desperately need in the midst of chaos.
Amen.
And one of the thoughts that I would have you think about today is the danger of normalcy. When we're in a relationship, when we're in someone's presence over and over and over again, it becomes very normal, and we can be very complacent, and we've kind of missed the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And I think that can happen to us in the church or in our relationship with Christ, where God becomes normal, which is awesome because God's always there and we're in constant relationship with God, but we miss the beauty of this presence. We miss delighting in his presence. And because he's kind of always there, I'm gonna try myself today, or I'm gonna try relying on other people because I've been relying on God for a while, and that's awesome, but maybe I want to try something else today. And no, like don't do that, right? Run to the Lord over and over and over again. Never let him become normal. Never let his presence be diminished by our pursuit of other things. Don't allow the sorrows to multiply after running after multiple gods. So just leave you with verse 11. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore.